one of the best national statistical agency in the world, Statistics South Africa. Welcome. I also want to welcome our colleagues who are joining online. We need to embrace technology, so we are going to go and also ensure that our colleagues online, they're also part of these proceedings. Let me introduce myself the way my grandmother taught me. Sorry, those who don't understand the language, there will be some subtitles somewhere here. My name is Rakutwana Soli Alex Mulai, Kingwana Regina Leshatrak Mulai. I was born here and I work here. I'm not a migrant, so unlike other colleagues, they know themselves. We're not going to mention names, and we do have statistics. Our colleagues who are coming from the other side of North, they're here. Some of us were born here and we work here. Welcome. In short, I was just introducing my name. We are here to discuss and also talk about the 2020 round of census and also the plan for 2030. For some of us who've been part of the census for 2020, we know and we have experience, and we're going to share it. As you're all sitting here as experts at your own rights, you are going to share with us. We are going to share with us your expectations. So we are going to discuss and refine the principle of recommendation for 2030 round of censuses. This revision will give us an understanding of how we can plan our census in the next 10 years. I was talking to my brother here, William, and was telling me that there's other African countries who are conducting their censuses this year. It will be very interesting to also to have an understanding of their experience and also how are they planning also the next censuses within the next 10 years. Without wasting any time, we do have colleagues who are coming from UK and also US who are going to share with us. So I'm going to request, we'll start, before we go to US, because I know there's some elections that are happening there, let's go to UK. And I'm going to ask my colleague to come and share some opening remarks and also give us a statement of support coming from ONS in UK. I think this is also one of the best statisticians that we know in the country. So welcome, Sen, and please come and join us and give us your openings. Thank you so much.
Good morning, colleagues, census experts, friends. I'm Garnet Compton. I work in the International Development Team at the Office for National Statistics in the UK. I'm currently based in Zimbabwe. I lead our partnership with the Zimbabwe Statistics Agency and remotely from there also with the Namibia Statistics Agency. I'm also one of the census leads in our International Development Team, and previously I worked at UNECA assisting them supporting censuses across the region. Previously, I led large projects for the UK census in 2011 and 2001. We at ONS are delighted to be here today and collaborating with our partners, UNECA, UNFPA, the US Census Bureau, Statistics South Africa, that's in no particular order, by the way, for this important and frankly interesting event. ONS has been working with partners across the region over the last 6 years to assist countries in developing and implementing censuses. During our collaborations, we've had the privilege of working closely with many of you here this week. We're thrilled to be reviving important discussions, and these close collaborations have given us good insights into local census implementations and see some very innovative solutions that have been developed, as well as those unexpected problems that inevitably arise during a census. So for example, we helped NSOs to realize that even if data is collected electronically, i.e. a CAPI application, and enumerators are well trained, there will still be lots of errors. Example in names. But that we can use automatic matching techniques to deal with most of this error and thereby save lots of time. In one country, it took PES matching down to less than 1 month in the previous 6 months. Or, as another example, the use of dashboards to monitor the progress and quality of enumeration. This facility was always there, but now the focus is on interpreting and reacting to what it tells you more than actually the process of collecting the data to monitor the progress. And that's why this event is so incredibly important, to document and share these lessons. It will help to maintain institutional knowledge, as often there is minimal experience carried over from census to census. So having something for the next generation of census takers is critical. And there will be new developments by the time your next census comes around, which makes some of the lessons that we've had from the 20 round irrelevant, but many will still be appropriate, and in fact, may be more severe in 10 years' time. For example, more scrutiny on the quality of the data, or higher demand for timely statistical outputs with media-friendly data stories. The key challenges facing countries in the 2020 round, I think, will be largely present in 2030, but potentially even more challenging. This includes census resourcing, capability, security, and buy-in and support from key stakeholders, and also coverage, where some populations will become harder to enumerate. Your knowledge, expertise, and experience are crucial to this event. It's an opportunity to share and document your insights and learning, but also an opportunity to come together as a community. The ability to share experience and learn from one another is one of the greatest enablers we have. It's easier and more constructive to learn from colleagues who have been through similar experiences. That's our experience anyway. So I'm very excited to hear your experiences and worries over the course of this week. Let's celebrate and build on your successes and use this opportunity to look forward and make the 2030 round even more successful. I encourage you to be open and honest with your successes, and perhaps even more importantly, about what you would do differently, because that is how we can make improvements for 2030. Lastly, I'd like to thank again my colleagues from ONS, UNECA, UNFPA, the US Census Bureau, and Statistics South Africa for organizing this incredibly essential and timely event. And to all of you for your participation and forthcoming contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are here to document and share our experiences, our worries, and also we need to be honest and open about what happened in 2020 and also how we're going to improve in 2030. Thank you so much. We are going to move along. I'm going to ask my colleague from US, Oliver, to come and give his opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Statistics South Africa, UNECA, for organizing this important event. I'm pleased to participate in this expert working group to review of the 2020 round and planning for the 2030 round of population housing censuses in Africa. My name is Oliver Fisher. I'm Chief of the Census Bureau's International Program Center, and I'm happy to be here. The 2020 round of censuses has, by every measure, presented the global statistical community unprecedented challenges. I'll just hold for a minute. So we've experienced unprecedented challenges in this census round. The COVID-19 pandemic, and all the related health and financial implications resulted in delays, postponements, and in some cases, cancellations of our census plans. However, this challenging period has also highlighted our dedication and commitment to producing high-quality statistics, as well as the value our statistics, our official statistics, bring to helping policymakers and the public health experts make informed decisions. The 2020 round has proven us, the global statistical community, to be capable of adapting to evolving realities, to pivoting towards the implementation of our contingency plans, and to the value of thinking outside the box. It is my belief that the challenging experiences of this past census round will better equip us as a community to make future censuses more resilient. The purpose of this convening is to capture our collective experiences during the 2020 census round and to learn from each other so that we can move towards a successful...
Can you mute himself, please? We can't hear you. We can't hear you, you are muted.
Okay. That's a familiar voice. I wonder who that is.
It's the other Oliver.
Okay, I will just continue here. It's my belief that the challenging experience of the census round will better equip us as a community to make future censuses more resilient. And as a refresher, similar to what our ONS colleague mentioned, the purpose of this convening is to capture our collective experiences during the 2020 round and to learn from each other so that we can move towards a successful 2030 round of censuses in Africa. I urge all of us here to be open with our experiences, so not just to share our successes, but to also highlight our challenges and our missteps. Because it is through this open dialogue that we can gain the most of our time together and ensure that this handbook can serve as a valuable tool for us all as we prepare for the 2030 round of censuses in Africa. The U.S. Census Bureau's International Program Center, through the generous financial support of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, has a long and productive legacy of supporting our African sister and brother national statistical offices conduct high-quality population and housing censuses, and I'm incredibly proud of the impact of our partnerships. We accomplish this through the provision of capacity-strengthening-oriented technical support and the development and dissemination of free tools that are specifically designed to facilitate the census-taking process. We partnered with most of the countries in this room and are eager to continue and expand our partnership with you in the 2030 round. The Census Bureau and USAID are motivated to support Africa in the implementation of the 2030 round of censuses, and this starts with the refinement and further development of the Digital Population Housing Census Handbook of Africa. May our time together here in the week ahead move us further towards the goal that motivates our census work, and that is that everyone gets counted because everyone counts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you so much. Are we sorted with the sound? Can our colleagues who are joining us online, can they hear us? Are we okay? All right, thank you so much. Because we are recording, Oliver, we'll share your notes. So we'll definitely share your speech. But thank you so much. We are now coming into the region. We got two colleagues who are coming outside the region. Now we're going to talk to, or we're going to request our colleague coming from the UNFPA, a technical advisor, Dr. Frederick, you can come and give us your opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Good morning, colleagues. Let me start by welcoming all participants from member states because indeed it's because of you that we are here. I also want to recognize the Director or Statistician General from Statistics South Africa, and the team. I see a large team which really shows how Stat South Africa actually takes this training or meeting. I would also want to acknowledge the colleagues from UNECA, from US Census Bureau, from ONS, but also from UNFPA, because from UNFPA we have a real big team, because when the UN, or at the country level, the UN support to the censuses is often done through UNFPA. So we made sure that all of our technical support from CTAs, from the people who are coordinating censuses at the country level, are all represented here to really share those experiences. But also, we have also the regional economic commissions, the East African community. I think they are present, and we would want to acknowledge them. I think my name is Frederico Kwayo. I'm a regional advisor for population and development, overseeing the census planning and implementation in the region, East and Southern Africa. So I'm talking on behalf of the regional director, who could not be here with us. And also we wanted our country representative for South Africa, who is also the country director for Botswana and Eswatini, to be here, but is just reporting from leave today, and therefore we'll get the opportunity for him to maybe be here during the closing. I think we all know that UNFPA has a tradition of supporting censuses, and that is through planning, through implementation, analysis, and also promoting data accessibility and utilization. So we've done this over the years, and that is what we are known for. On top of that, we also support countries through different modalities. That is technical support. We have funding, capacity strengthening, trainings, quality control or assurance, and much more so in terms of resource mobilization. So we are in the life course of the censuses as UNFPA, but also our support actually differs from country to country. There are those countries that would need our support in terms of CTAs, we offer that. There are those that we only offer quality assurance in the work that they do. So depending on the needs of the country, depending on the assessments, we offer those support together with the other partners. I think this meeting is quite important, just like my speakers or colleagues who have talked from ONS, but also from the US Census Bureau. And you'll keep on hearing this, because we are here for this week-long meeting to share experiences of the 2020 round of census. What has succeeded? Because I think there's a lot of success if there's the word success. There's also achievements that we've actually realized. There are challenges, there are gaps, and all these together will actually guide us in shaping the next round of census, which is the 2030. So I would just highlight maybe 3 or 4 things that to us as UNFPA is important. And I think the first one is the coordinated technical support. And I'm proud to say that in 2020 round of census, we have had a very good coordination with UNECA, with US Census Bureau, with ONS, so that when we go to a country, then we know what UNFPA is providing, we know what UNECA is providing, and so is the US Census Bureau and ONS. And in that way, then we are able to really make use of the scarce resources in the most efficient way. Things like workshops, we've actually held jointly so that at least we cut on cost, but also avoid really bringing confusion to national statistical offices. So we believe that we are going to really continue with that as we go to the next census. The other thing which is important is that although we have successes, but actually the great countries of Africa, you talk of Ethiopia, we talk of DRC, Congo, Nigeria, which has a lot of people in Africa. And you know, these countries are not going to do the census in 2020 round. So collectively, what can we do? And indeed, this actually sits in the honors of all of us. You talk of UNFPA, you talk of UNECA, but I think much more so the Statistician General of South Africa. Because I remember we used to have the African Symposium for Statistical Development, and this symposium would be taken to such countries so that actually we can engage with the political class in those countries. So maybe through your chair, the SG, I think we need to really come up with a strategy to make sure that even though in this round, these countries may not do the census, but what is it that we can do to really ignite the political support for those countries? I think there are also other countries in West Africa. Within this region, a lot of countries are doing the census, but we are just worried as UNFPA and as the international community that concerted efforts need to be done. My next point relates to all these discussions that we are going to hold here would actually feed into the principles and recommendations for the 2030. So it's not a light matter. We are going to document them, but also some of it is going to feed into the principles and recommendations for planning the 2030. And just last week, we were in New York to more or less discuss the third revision of the principles and recommendations. And also Africa was represented by the MC, talked of one of the best NSOs in Africa, Statistics South Africa. So StatSA was represented, and also other really strong NSOs. So we look forward that some of these discussions are going to get their way into the principles and recommendations. But I think more importantly is these experiences, we could use them to more or less try to contextualize the principles and recommendations to conform to the African situation. Because ideally, if you've read and you are a census expert, then Europe indeed develops what they call as the principles and recommendations that is relevant to the countries within Europe. So I tend to believe we are going to put our heads together and see how we can do that for the 2030 round of census, and then all these experiences that we'll get from here will feed into that. I think my last comment would relate to the documentation. We are all census experts, and really, we all know how important the data is. But it is only as a statistician that we know that. It would be good if the census offices, but also other offices, we could document some of the impact that have come from the use of census data. If it is in the education, if it is in, let's say, in the health, we need to really document this, and this documentation of the impact of the census data will actually enable us in terms of resource mobilization. For example, if you are going to the Ministry of Finance to request for census allocation, and you can demonstrate that the census data has been used to put up the schools, then this would be one of the strong points of the census. So I just request that, if possible, maybe each and every country need to document that, so that at least we have some of the impact stories that are coming from the census. So I look forward to a very robust discussion on behalf of UNFPA. We are present in the room and will contribute as much as possible so that at least this week-long discussion is a success. I think lastly is to thank my brother and colleague, William, for really working so hard. We had a technical committee that was planning this, but UNECA being the African institution, they took the lead on this, and we really want to thank you, William, for the work well done. Thanks, and over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. We need to document the impact stories. And I think SGF had you in terms of what is it that we can do to assist other countries that have conducted their census. And this is not only for the SG, but it's all of us here. We have to think of what is it that we can do. And I think we have had our colleague from UNFPAs, and I think by the end of this week, we may have a solution in terms of what is it that we can do. Thank you so much. Let's move on. I'm going to request the Director of Center for African Statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Oliver. I understand is joining us online to give us his opening remarks.
Good morning. I hope you are able to hear me. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. By the end of this week, colleagues, we are going to establish the Africa Census Community of Practice and Census Coordinating Committee. And this is one of the initiatives that will come out from this meeting. Without any wasting of time, I will... Can we mute our colleague? Thank you. You know, technology sometimes it can show you things. I'm going to request, I call him my boss, Ntate Risenga, to come and address us and give us his opening remarks. Thank you, SG.
Program Director and Master of Ceremonies. Some of us come from villages that are having sophistications of culture that once someone becomes a Master of Ceremonies, their title is quite huge and they have a lot of responsibilities. But for today, we can accord you that responsibility accordingly. Let me mention that before I start speaking, that I'm not a very good public speaker. So if I struggle, just finish whatever you would have wanted to finish for me, wherever you are seated. So let me start with the director for the Center for African Statistics, who has just finished addressing us online, my brother and friend, and a colleague that I've known for quite some time, or throughout my career as a professional, Mr. Oliver Chinganya. He has already touched on issues of challenges we are having on the African continent. And if the audience allows me here, I potentially will also touch briefly on that. Let me take note of the Regional Technical Director of the UNFPA for East and Southern Africa, Mr. Frederick Okwayo, and he came to address us as well. And he sits next to, you know, the UNFPA has a lot of titles. My brother Tapiwa Jamba, who we have seen each other a number of times. But let me take note of the strategic advisor to the Center for African Statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and our brother, Mr. Garnet Compton from ONS UK. But as if counting in the census, counting Olivers is not enough, I would want to take note of the Chief of International Program Center, the Population Division from the US Census Bureau, Mr. Oliver Fisher. So we have two Olivers. In the event we vote, we will have both of them. And the Chief Demographic and Social Statistics Center for African Statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. William Muhava, who is here, and a great friend and a comrade in the field of work on the continent. Let me take note of StatSA, the executive management team that sits on that table where Soli is. But not only that, there are so many colleagues that I've seen from StatSA here that if they were to raise their hands, our friends that are thinking we should vote to see which country wins by attendance, like Colin from Kenya, would be dwarfed. So let's not even start voting. Members of the expert group, and indeed colleagues joining us online, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my greatest pleasure and quite a convivial to extend a warm greetings to all of you this morning. I have already taken note of my brother Oliver, who is joining online. But let me indicate that as we gather here in Pretoria, we may lament about the 2020 round of population and housing censuses. It's only a few months to go, and it is closing. So, in one of the dialects from Malawi, they say, "Maji kataika sauleka." You never cry over spilled milk. The 2020 round of population and housing censuses is gone. And what we can do from it is to learn from it and take lessons for the next round. So it is quite critical that as we gather here, we are gathering, emerging from New York, where the principles and recommendations for the population and housing censuses at a global level was being discussed. And it is critical that when we gather here, we take the baton sufficiently enough going ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, a census is rather one of the most complex processes, especially that it galvanizes everyone in the nation during peace times. We know that during war, nations are galvanized. Everyone is affected, but nobody wants war. We want peace. So let us vote for the censuses at all times, because that is the only thing that can bring us together during peace times, so that we can know every aspect of our society about where our people live and play. Having emerged from the 2020 round ourselves, South Africa, we were given an option to run a census in this round or wait for the 2020 round. We weighed options, and the esteemed brains from the organization that sit there, the leadership of the organization, together with an independent body, which is the Statistics Council, came to me and said, and their job is to give the Statistician General advisory. And the Statistician General, if he wishes, can slip over some of the ideas that are brought. So I slept over, and when I woke up, the decision was made that we were going to run a census in the middle of COVID-19. It is not an easy decision to make. We went into field, we didn't even know when COVID-19 would end. As if that was not enough, 2 of our provinces went into political eruptions, having unrest. And while we were in the field, we had nature visited us in the form of disasters. So we had floods in 3 of our provinces. And we came back. We went back to conduct the post-enumeration survey. Our undercount is the highest in the world, recorded, 31%. But we were able to make adjustments, and with a lot of work we have done with many of you here. Some of you were camping at our organization for a very long time, and we made the data available. With the post-enumeration survey, we made adjustments, we released the data. The census has become a political football now in South Africa. It has been discussed by technicians, experts, academics. The politicians have carried it through. Some political parties have even said, possibly we should have a rerun of the census. And the people who started the debate in the public space said, no, we didn't mean a rerun. We just said we wanted to raise some few issues here and there, and issues that we have gone public about. So as of last week, Friday, we appeared before the Portfolio Committee of Parliament, which is our entry into Parliament. And we had to go through explanations to take Parliament through. So these are some of the issues that in conducting censuses, countries have to go through. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that when we are solid on methods, we will not cave under any political pressure. No statistician in official practice will cave under political pressure. Because we don't, when you take up a job as a statistician, especially when you say we'll conduct censuses, you know that you put your career on the block. But we work with no fear. And please be assured that there are no fears that this statistician standing in front of you will be fired from office because of political pressure. We don't go through such political pressures. We argue our technical case. So I want to say this because I want us to know that even in countries that we have conducted censuses, out of 54 countries on the African continent, in the 2010 round of population and housing censuses, 4 countries didn't conduct their censuses. That is Central Africa Republic, Eritrea, Somalia, and Congo DRC. Somalia did conduct a large-scale sample survey. Now, the director of the African Center for Statistics said only 37 went to conduct their censuses now. So it means we are lagging behind as the African continent. So we need a different mechanism, and some of these issues go beyond just making available the results there. The political navigations require that we work together to assist not only on the African continent, but even beyond, especially in developing countries where such challenges still lie. We know that in the 2020 round of population and housing censuses, those who conducted their censuses indicated that 72% went on the main form of collection, computer-assisted personal interviews. And there are those who went to pen-to-paper personal interviews, 43%, and computer-assisted web interviews, 35%. We need to start sketching how we will conduct censuses in the future. One of the biggest challenges we are facing in South Africa is hard to count areas, not on your farms or in rural areas. People are staying in gated communities, in urban centers, and they are hard to count. We will have to come with creative ways. And it's no joke. One professor, when he was studying a neighborhood that was difficult to count, Professor Charles Simpkins, went to the sewer and started measuring to start getting estimates of how many people maybe directing human waste to such sewers. So I'm saying we'll have to come with reality, colleagues. The world is changing, and it's changing at a faster pace. And it's not going to wait for us. I know that when you mention certain names in public fora, you actually invoke high levels of emotions. But history, and I repeat, history is no pastime. It is a reality. Because it is the lessons of yesterday that give us hope to hold on for today and to have hope forever and ever of tomorrow. So when you go to northern Pakistan, there was a compound where Osama bin Laden stayed. And he decided, him and those who stayed there, decided that they were not going to ban trash because the authorities would know how many people are there using trash from a dustbin or rubbish bin. That's a lesson for statisticians. How many of us are going to go into those trash, the rubbish bins, and estimate how many people are staying in this compound when we can't reach them? How many of us will go to water taps and want to estimate the volume of water being used? It will assist us know the hard to reach. So let me indicate that in the next few days, as we gather virtually and physically, we are going to have having a diverse level of representation amongst ourselves, both from statistical agencies, international agencies, and UN entities. And I can see that the program is quite exciting to ignite levels of debate and discussions that will make us emerge out of Pretoria better and better prepared and planning better for the next round. So as we move forward, lest we forget, and indeed, lest we forget, it's our statistics, albeit with limitations sometimes, that tell us that we work on averages and we don't break confidentiality. But even as we do so, we always know that behind the numbers that other members of the public carry as abstract is human life. And human life has equal worth. For those who haven't come to appreciate that through our numbers, we are riding a horse that explains the story of human life on its equality of worth, we have lost the cause as statisticians. Lest we forget. 3,105 mainly young people perished in the year 2023 trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. This year, it hasn't concluded. 884. Those are the documented ones. There are many that are not documented. Many that the post-enumeration survey would say they are missing. And they are going there in search of better avenues and greener pastures. We should know that the responsibility we have as statisticians should change the world so that many of our sons and daughters, with better planning that our countries will have opportunities here at home. And when they leave, they should leave through the right channels and through the appropriate gate. Not through the sea, where many of them don't know whether they will arrive. And because I've spoken about the appropriate gate, in ancient Jerusalem, there used to be a gate called through the eye, it was the eye of the needle. So the rich, the poor, the laden, everyone carrying camel and otherwise had to walk through that. Because it brought equality. But we know, even as we gather here, that we haven't achieved enough equality. I'm seated here at the high table, and I'll spare not myself too. This high table where I'm seated, it's all of us, the boys' choir. The girls' choir is not there. Almost every table I'm looking here is dominated by the boys' choir. Where is the girls' choir? Because if the world was the same and the world was equal, and if we were counting and we were saying there are more women in our countries, we would see women even represented in our gatherings and our meetings. So the story of the girl child, no matter how much we say we don't carry emotions as statisticians, we're telling ourselves a lie. Because no man would want to see his own daughter, his own wife, his own partner, his own mother left behind. So why, when we are rising in our careers, women are left behind, yet they have equal opportunities when we go to school? What happens along the way? This is a matter we need to go and discuss, not here, including in our own home countries. Because if we don't do that, it will be as good as what we experienced here in South Africa, where some sectors of society didn't want apartheid to end, so that other sectors shouldn't join. So an exclusion of women, even in positions of power, is a serious matter we should never disregard. Friends, I told you I'm no public speaker. And if I say something you don't like, finish for me. But one thing I was told very well when I was growing up in the village by the elders, I was taught by the elders, is to tell truths and truths only, and tell no lies, no half-truths, and tell nothing false. I was raised by a team of elderly men and women so that I can learn from them, because when they grow old, they only tell truths. In conclusion, there's an African proverb that says that if you want visitors, you must leave your front door open. And indeed, we have left the front door open. And I wish you the best of the discussions in these few days. And of course, it's a Heritage Month in South Africa. So the celebrations will be later in the month, around the 24th. But can we show and demonstrate our heritage while we are here? And let me thank and express my gratitude to the UNECA, the Office of the National Statistics at ONS UK, the UNFPA, and indeed StatsSA. Program Director, I need to apologize to you. I didn't have enough time to prepare for a shorter input, and I didn't have enough time to prepare points that I think we would want to consider. This is the least I can give you. And let me thank you, Program Director, for I know you will give me no other time to speak again. I thank you.
I'm not a public speaker. Thank you so much, SG. It's going to be very difficult to speak after SG. Good luck to those who are coming after the SG. Colleagues, it's about 10 past 10. I think we are now moving. I'm going to request the colleagues who are going to come. I think, Dr. William, you have a presentation, isn't it?
No.
You don't have a presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, quickly.
Yes, so Dr. Williams will explain to us why we are here and give us a much more details in terms of the objectives of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Molai. Thank you, SG. I think I should first of all, start by saying, we have a very strong advocate. In him, at least we have one statistician general here who are actually be coming to the Statistical Commission to declare the 2030 decade open for the census. So we actually need to handle him very well because he's the only one who will actually be able to stand on our side when we request the Statistical Commission to declare the African census decade open. If none does that, then we'll go through the decade willy-nilly or the way it has to be. We won't have the African program on the African censuses, and we won't have the issues of the Census Coordinating Committee established and so forth. So we'll actually need him to be the one to present that for us. So we'll actually be engaging with you. So we are not seeing the last of you here because of that advocacy we need you to do in a month's time. I just thought I should actually highlight here that you have a more important role in the 2030 census decade than you thought. Let me also thank StatsSA, for agreeing to host this workshop. I think I should explain to people why we ended up here. Otherwise, we just think there was, a decision taken by someone. The first thing, we really wanted some place where you could deliberate comfortably. You are not worrying about, travel. You are not worrying about, hotels being not comfortable and so forth. So we settled for a place where at least you could get the best comfort. Why? Because we actually want you to come up with, deliberations which will usher us into the 2030 round. So this is very important for us, and that choice had to be somewhere where we could actually, bring everybody with ease. And I think, as Mr. Molai said, we also had to look for a very well-performing statistical office, and Stats SA came on top of the list, and we said there are quite a number of things we can learn from Stats SA. So with those introductory sort of remarks, so why are we here? As you would have noted in the information note or in the concept note, the main objective is to undertake a comprehensive review of the 2020 round. And I think my previous speakers have spoken about that very well. What have we done very well in the 2020 round? And what have we not done well? And how can we mitigate these problems? And I always say to statistician generals, there's no 100% correct census. It's actually that small percentage which you might not have covered, which you need to explain and say, next time, how do I mitigate that percentage? Our best performing country was Rwanda, but still they had 98%. Is there anybody from Rwanda or Tanzania? Tanzania also had about 98%, I think. But is that 2%? Who were those 2%? You remember I was in Tanzania when the census happened. And the first day, people were phoning the office and says, I have not been enumerated. I had never seen it anywhere. Not anywhere where on the first day, and it was declared a holiday, by the way. This is a holiday, people are at home waiting for enumerators. So there were certain things which you would expect in such circumstances that it would be 100%, but it ended up not being 100%. So even in Tanzania, who were those 2% we could not find? So the issue here is to interrogate some of those things and say, how can they be mitigated into solutions? Then the second aspect of the EGM is actually to plan for the 2030 round of population and housing censuses. And I should put here a caveat that one of the things which we now realize is Africa, we are going in our own direction of census taking, right? Because we miss administrative records. Our civil registration systems are not as strong as we would anticipate. There were countries which tried that, to use administrative records, but it didn't end up happening because what's the basis? You can't use your cell phone records, the telcos and so forth, because you can't identify out of those who is the head of the household. And we require that in a census, it's the head of the household who responds. So we ended up having all those issues. So which is our own direction of census taking in Africa? The most important thing for us will be to continue the digitalization of the 2030 round. And how are we going to do it better? So during the course of the week, those are the issues we'll interrogate and say, how are we going to make this digitalization of the African censuses more successful? Then secondly, using the 2030 round as a preparatory round for administrative-based censuses. And for us, that's a commitment. I think Fred mentioned that Europe took quite a number of years, and I can actually tell you of the history of Denmark. To be where they are, they started in 1969 to where they are with administrative-based census. And I think 1969, I was actually like 6 years old. Imagine. So they've only now in the 2020 round managed to actually have, fully administrative-based censuses. So even for us, administrative-based censuses might be, after the 2030 round, a couple of countries where we can say we can actually do that. I mean, we have Mauritius, for example, but still, with Mauritius, it's a certain portion of the census which they actually rely on administrative-based records. For example, they don't ask questions on births because their civil registration is quite efficient. So there's no need to ask, was there any birth in the household in the last? They can actually quickly pick it up in their civil registration system. So we are committing, and this is SG, one of the points we want you to put to the Statistical Commission that we are committing the 2030 round as a preparatory phase for administrative-based censuses in Africa. So if we can manage to come up with a couple of points which we want our statistician generals to adopt at the Statistical Commission, that's why we actually organized this meeting before the Statistical Commission. How do we want the 2030 round in Africa to look like? What will be our priorities? When I make my second presentation, I'll actually go through what were our priorities in the 2020 round. Are we going to change them in the 2030 round? And if we are going to change them, what do we need to change? So we need to come up with recommendations and outcomes, which we will review on Friday, as in our last session, and say, this is what we want to tell our statistician generals, that this is how we plan to run the 2030 round. So if we can achieve that, we would have achieved quite a lot. So those are the main objectives of the EGM. Let me just go to a few things which are actually administrative issues. Like any meeting, we usually have administrative issues to look at. We have people who have been sponsored by very different institutions, so you should make sure you know who is sponsoring you, what are the mechanisms for transferring your DSA if it hasn't already been paid, and so forth. Then on a daily basis, we'll be starting, we expect people here at 8:45 for 9 a.m. And the sessions end at 17:30, which is 5:30. There's only one day when we will go overtime. We couldn't slot in a 6th day for one session. So that day will go until about 6:30 to make sure we don't go into Saturday. So there's one day we have an extended session. Then the other thing, we are experts here, so the sitting arrangement is random. We don't have to sit by countries, because if you sit by your countries, we don't want you to be influencing each other and say, let's say this. We are experts. So you have been brought here on your individual capacity as an expert. I think, is that coming out right? It might look a bit extreme, but that is exactly what it is. We actually requested the countries to nominate their best experts in substantive issues on censuses, on IT issues, on GIS. So you are standing here as an expert. We might want you to give examples of your country and whatever, we are not here to praise how good we did the last census. I think the SG came out very well on that. It's a done and dusted round. Now we are looking at how can we do the next census well. So we still have, I think, one country, is it Gabon, which still has to do its census before December. I think there are two. I will remember the other one. And then we still have Angola, actually, which is in our region here. I even forgot that, we are working with Angola, and Mola is here providing the technical support on Angola. So we still have two countries which have to do their censuses by the end of the year. Okay, the last thing, we are in a mall, sort of. We are actually in a mall, right? So at the end of the day, you are free to go and, there's Menlyn Mall nearby. Actually, there's Menlyn Main, which is another small mall adjacent to it. And I was with people in Dubai about 2 weeks back, and people were coming back at 3 a.m. And I wondered how productive they became the next day. And definitely it showed one of the days where half of them were sleeping. So we don't expect that. We are in a very good place. We are in a mall. I think they close very late and whatever. So we just have to make sure, we do things in moderation, as attendance is really the most primary thing. So let me end there. If there are any administrative issues, please, you can, get in touch with us and we can try to solve. I know people who have lost their luggage. We are in touch with the airport. There are also people who might need to leave a day or so earlier, and we might want your flight details so that at least we make those arrangements. So I would wish everybody a very interesting week, and our sole objective is to make the 2030 round better. And I think when I do my next presentation, I'll actually dwell into this issue of the big countries which we have missed, Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. You can actually see in numbers what it means for Africa. How many or what proportion of the people we have missed, counting as an estimate of the impact on the 2020 round. So let me end there and wish everybody a successful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. William. We are in the mall, colleagues. So for those who want to spend, we'll spend. I'll show you where. Can I ask Tate Tapiwa? He's going to take us through a presentation looking at the global perspective for 2020 round, and also he's going to share with us what's going to happen in the next 2030 round. Thank you.
I shared it with them. I don't know if it's... Good morning. Morning, colleagues. Whilst I wait for the presentation to come up, maybe I also need to just acknowledge the best statistics office, one of the best statistics offices in the world, and also just acknowledge that that statistics office, well, is one of my homes too. So, is it coming? Okay. I will introduce myself in the meantime. I'm Tapiwa Jamba, and I'm with UNFPA. I'm based at headquarters, where I'm the technical advisor responsible for, among other things, our global support to censuses. Okay.
Did you share your prejudice?
I did share with someone at the back there. And I actually saw it popping up on the screen at some time. Is there a way I can maybe show from my own laptop? I gave it to Mahlomola. You got it, right? Okay. Can I connect my laptop? Is it possible? This one here. Okay. And apologies for the tech challenges there. Anyway, so I'll give a quick overview of the global picture in terms of the 2020 round of censuses, and also shed a little more light on some of the issues that we are looking into as we get into the 2030 round of censuses. So the 2020 round of censuses, the context, this round of censuses came up, is a round of censuses that it started in 2015, and the SDGs were also launched in 2015, and the SDGs came with new and many other demands for population data, including data from censuses. We also know that the 2020 round is a round that saw many countries adopting new technologies in terms of the methods, use of admin data for censuses. This came in different forms. In other parts of the world, we have a number of countries that actually began using admin data for census purposes. Multimodal data collection, as we adopted the new technologies, we still had to balance out different ways of actually collecting that data. New concerns or governance concerns regarding security of data, funding challenges. Many countries face the funding challenges. But one of the key challenges is also the capacity gaps, especially related to the adoption of the new technologies. So many of our colleagues or the offices did not have the required capacity. But above all, we also had conflict, instability, and mobility. And as you all know, it's part of the reasons why some of the big countries in Africa itself have not been able to conduct the census. Then, of course, I will not say much, but we also saw in the 2020 census round the massive impact of COVID-19, which we all felt in one way or the other. Okay, looking at just the progress in terms of implementation of the 2020 round, here I'm showing countries where UNFPA is working. UNFPA supports programs in 155 countries globally. So the greens indicate the countries that have already completed their 2020 census round. The deeper the green means the earlier that census was conducted. The later the census was conducted. The very light shade is the very beginning of the 2020 round of 2015, being the lightest of the green shades. And then we come up to 2024. We also have countries that are scheduled to conduct censuses in 2024 as well as 2025. The grays on the map, which are some of those big countries we are talking about, those are countries that will miss the 2020 census round for one reason or another. So when we look at it globally, actually, we have almost 2 billion people that will not be counted, or that were not counted in the 2020 round of censuses, because we have big countries out of the countries that are missing the round, India being one of those. So if you take India, you add Nigeria, you add DRC, you are getting there. Okay, and then just to highlight some of the key innovations, particularly from a UNFPA perspective. Some of the key innovations that UNFPA supported in the 2020 round of censuses. One was the use of handheld devices through different ways, whether this be procurement, through facilitating sharing of tablets or different mechanisms. The mapping and use of satellite imagery, mixed methods, GIS, and the use of GIS was across the census phases, in the different phases of the censuses, from the planning to the dissemination of the census results. I would like to just maybe point out a little bit about the population estimates, which I have a couple of slides on that, just to explain a little bit. These estimates, let me pull up the next slide. Okay. Now, the population estimates, these are estimates that are generated. If we are talking census, we are talking about countries where they can send enumerators to part of the country, but are not able to cover certain areas because of maybe instability or some political challenges. So what do they do if they can enumerate the rest of the country, but there's a small portion that they cannot send enumerators to? So in the 2020 census round, we saw this innovation to generate population estimates based on modeling. The modeling where you use satellite imagery and data from a household survey or a mini census to generate those estimates. And this has proved actually to serve a number of different purposes. So whilst one purpose is to fill the data gaps where a census is not able to be conducted, we also see that these estimates were also actually quite useful for countries that were planning to conduct a census, especially if they have not conducted a census in a long time and they are trying to figure out issues to do with the population distribution, the enumeration areas, that they can actually produce these estimates and then send out mappers to the field to confirm what has been estimated. And we also see that these estimates are also actually proving quite popular even in countries that have conducted a full census in the enumeration. They have covered every part of the country, but when it comes to dissemination of the census results, some of the countries have opted to actually, because of the limitations in terms of the privacy and the protection of the individual data, that they actually get aggregated data at ward level or at district level and use the same techniques to disaggregate this data, and then use those modeled graded estimates for planning and decision making. So that's part of, this is just a quick summary of some of the countries that have used these population estimates. First, some of these countries are countries that have used it without a census. They are not able to conduct a census, but they need some basic data on the population for planning and decision making. So those are some of the countries. I'll just quickly go through. These are countries that use the approach to fill data gaps. I don't know if they are colleagues from Burkina here, for example, or from Mali, because these already conducted their censuses, but they used those approaches to fill those data gaps. Cameroon, they are planning to use it, but for the upcoming census. Colombia, that is in Latin America. Okay, we also saw an increased call for geospatially enabled dissemination portals in the 2020 census round for countries that managed to conduct the census. And as part of our contribution to this, at UNFPA, we developed a global portal, a global population data portal that, that can be customized to meet national needs. And I think we can discuss it when we look at the 2030 census round planning. Okay. We also saw that there was an increased use of generation of use cases, examples of how you can use census data to answer specific programming questions in different countries. For example, if you want to look at population access to family planning services, population access to HIV treatment or anything like that, it is possible to actually, we have worked with countries to generate some of these use cases that demonstrate how you can use population census data to address some of your programming needs, data needs. Other emerging innovations, I think we saw an increased interest in use of administrative data for census purposes. Surprisingly, actually, whilst, like I said, that some parts of the world, they are already doing this, but when COVID came, many of our colleagues on the African continent were asking to say, but given that there is COVID and we cannot undertake a census anymore, why can we not use administrative data? So that's a question that we faced, that came up, and from UNFPA we looked into this and we have developed an e-learning course, which is a basic course that takes you through the conditions, what is required, what is involved. And I have brought some cards which I have on the table here, which I will put maybe at the table at the door there. If you are interested, get those cards. They have a QR code at the back which can lead you to the course. It's a basic course on what transitioning to a register-based census actually means. So I would encourage you to either take the card and share it with colleagues in your office. It just enables us to understand and begin to know what we need to do if we want to use administrative data for census purposes. And then, I mean, there was the wider call for census data, including small area estimation. I think, and I know that as UNFPA, we supported some trainings around how to undertake these small area estimates to address SDG data needs. Then also the integration of census as a key pillar of national data systems. It's part of what we are taking away from the 2020 census round and as we move into the 2030 census round. Now, how UNFPA supports, just a quick slide, but you probably all already know how UNFPA supports censuses in the different countries. UNFPA offers a different range of types of support, operational and management, depending on the country context, as you know. Resource mobilization, direct technical assistance, capacity strengthening, different types of trainings, and we also count on partnerships. We do rely on strategic and technical partnerships to enhance our support to the census processes. These are just some of the examples. Now, looking ahead at the 2030 census round, what are we expecting? We are expecting a continuation or an increase in in new technologies and innovations. At the moment, we are looking at the issues to do with artificial intelligence. And so, does artificial intelligence have any place in the way we conduct and we disseminate our census results? These are some of the things that we need to address as we enter the 2030 census round. Advancing geospatial population estimation work is part of the estimates that I highlighted earlier on, and we will also still see a continuation in mixed methods and use of admin data for census purposes. Cost-efficient approaches for censuses, like I said, many countries are facing funding challenges, and I'm sure they will also be looking into ways in which they can cut the cost, but produce a high-quality census at the end. We also have issues to do with visibility, inclusion, and participation of different groups of different population groups in our countries. You know, if we are going to ensure that no one is left behind, we need to figure out ways in which we can ensure that these populations are visible and we are able to identify them so that they can also be included, they can participate in development processes. Increasing demand and use of census data, we see this continuing to increase in the 2030 census round. And, but at the same time, the issues to do with balancing access and privacy and security will continue with us, so we still need to figure out how to make the data available to users in the country, whilst at the same time providing the required security and for the data. Integration of censuses in national data systems. We still see the census continuing to be a key pillar of national data systems, and we will be figuring out and we will be working out how best to ensure that this happens, that census is linked to CRVS, is linked to other administrative data, especially if we are planning to, at any point, to use those admin data for census purposes. Okay, let me see if there's one more slide. Okay, yes. Now, UNFPA strategy for the 2030 census round. We actually had a strategy for the 2020 round, which we launched in 2017, and we updated it in 2019. So as we go into the 2030 round, we are looking at developing a corresponding strategy for UNFPA support to the 2030 census round. We will build on the experiences from the 2020 round, as I think already alluded to. First of all, as UNFPA, we have commissioned an independent evaluation that will tell us where we did well in our support to the 2020 census round, and that evaluation will also tell us where we did not do so well and what we need to address. And we will factor this as we develop our strategy for the 2030 census round. We will also build on the knowledge we will get from regional reviews such as this one. I think 2 weeks ago, we were in the one for Asia Pacific. We collected lessons learned from there, so we are doing the same here. And all this will feed into our strategy for the 2030 census round. And of course, we will rely on the country experiences. What actually happened in the countries, the challenges that you faced. Also, we have the emerging capacity challenges. We are aware of those, and those we will continue in our next strategy to figure out how to address those. Then we have the fourth revision of the UN principles and recommendations. I think a lot has already been said about this. So that will also help us to frame our UNFPA strategy for the 2030 census round. We will be relaunching our population data thematic fund. This is a thematic fund that's a very ambitious thematic fund that we launched at the beginning of 2020. I think it was in March 2020, just when COVID started. So as soon as we launched it, COVID came in so hard, all the priorities changed. So we kind of shelved that thematic fund. So we are hoping to revive this thematic fund in time for the 2030 census round so that we can contribute to increase the resources for supporting the 2030 round. So please wish us luck with the thematic fund. And then maybe lastly, just to also to inform you that the UNFPA HQ team actually is the whole division at HQ, which includes the census team, will be moving to the continent with effect from March 2025. So we are coming to be based in Nairobi, Kenya, beginning 2025. So hopefully this will mean that we will join hands with our colleagues from our regional offices and the ECA to provide more effective support to the African continent. Thank you very much.
much. Colleagues, we are not doing well in terms of time. I've requested my brother here, William, to combine the two agenda items. So he's going to take us through the overview of 2020 census undertaking in Africa. And he's also going to share with us how we're going to update and review the e-census handbook. Dr. William?
How do you change this thing? Okay. Okay, while we are waiting for them to upload the presentation. So we have heard the international story. Now we are going to go to the African story. Unfortunately, I would have told it in more detail, but because of the lack of time, I will try to summarize some of those. But if you want the African story, how we have gone through the decade, I'm still available for you to engage, especially each country, because you'll be amazed to know that the work we did with UNFPA, which is actually the UN entity mandated on censuses in the UN, we are just there to support them because we are in the Regional Economic Commission. So when you have issues to talk about censuses or to request about the censuses, that's your first point of call, the UNFPA. Then with us, we come to support technically, and that's what we have done. During the 2020 round, we have actually supported, out of the 39 which I said in the morning, we have supported 37 in some way or other. Some of them were as simply as just being there when they are doing field work, but we were in 37 of the 39, which is quite impressive because at a certain point, we were involved in almost all the African, censuses. So our story starts for the 2020 round. It started in 2014, which is exactly like 2024 where we are. The statistician generals met in Tunis and declared that the decade has started for African countries. And one of their commitments was, in 2014, was every African country will undertake a census in the decade. So we expected, considering that in the 2020 round, we had almost gotten 47, our hope was that in the 2020 round, we were going to get 100%. We were going to get the 7 remaining. Unfortunately, we have regressed. We ended up with 39, and those have implications. So, for Africa, when we formulated the Africa program, it was actually anchored on 2 of the international agendas. We have the 2063, which is the Africa we want. And that's where we are different from the globe. Because we have a different agenda item, which we need to actually make sure Africa fulfills and we monitor it. Then we have the global one, the SDGs. So we had to respond to both. And in formulating our censuses, that's one of the things we had to take into account. So as I said, here is our African journey. It started in 2014 in Tunis. So the 2030 round will actually start in Addis when these guys meet, or I can't say guys to my bosses. When our bosses meet, or our principals, I think it's a better term. When our principals meet and declare the decade starting, and we have to guide them on the priorities. What are the priorities for Africa for the next 10 years? They also met again in Kampala in 2015, and at the global level, at the 46th session, where they meet now globally, they also declared the world population, population and housing census open. So, we are 10 years after that. So, can somebody guess which session is going to declare the 2030 round open? From that sentence, the 46th declared the 2020 round open. It's 10 years, 10 years. So at the 6th, which is actually the last statistical commission, they actually declared the 2030 round open. So we already have a mandate which requires us to undertake the 2030 round. So we now need to localize it to the African program. I think one of the things which actually happened then was the ECA was required to develop an African program. As a regional commission, we had to localize whatever was agreed at the international level. And these are some of the things which we actually did, especially the resolutions which actually had to guide the 2020 round. So the Pan-African institutions, ECA, FDB, and AUC, were required to develop a 5-year plan. And it answers to the question where we are saying we have quite a number of African countries which are not undertaking their censuses. So the ECA, FDB, and AUC had to actually see how these countries could be assisted. Our DRC, our big countries. Then partnership and digitalization. This is a very important component because we actually had to make sure all censuses were digitalized. And I think we managed to achieve that. There's only one place where we failed, and I won't say it, because at the last minute they dropped all the tablets they had bought and actually printed questionnaire overnight and whatever, and ended up going into the field with questionnaires rather than tablet. I won't mention in case the people are here, but such changes are very drastic. How can you, after all the planning, to use tablets or smartphones, then overnight the DG that decides, no, it doesn't work here. Then they go and start printing questionnaires and whatever. I hope this round it won't happen. So here is our journey as determined by our statistician generals. It was, we needed to conduct a census during the 2015 to 2024 round. Every African country. So that was a very prime declaration. Every country. Then secondly, we had to mitigate the adverse impact of, in fact then it was conflict, emergencies, but we know we ended up having COVID, and I think Tapiwa has talked about it. The transition from manual to digital censuses was also part of the commitment by our DGs. Adopt carefully planned mixed methods, especially in areas of conflict or emergencies, and to consider new methods like online, Kawi, and so forth during the 2020 round. Some countries tried it and so forth. So, what preparations did we make? ECA developed with the AFDB and AUC, the Africa Program on Population and Housing Census decade 2015 to 2024. It's a document which was developed at the start of the decade and never got sort of updated as we went through the decade. And I hope this time for the 2030 round, we will actually make sure that there is actually, updating of this document, because it remained very static and it didn't change. The core DGs, which are our statistician generals, established the African Census Coordinating Committee. Actually, we have an African Census Coordinating Committee, which I'm not sure how effective it was, but it's not for me to judge anybody and say, But what I can say, our principals needed to actually make sure we were accountable, because during the whole decade, this committee didn't actually, fulfill its mandate. We ended up having the Census Technical Advisory Team. That's the one which became effective. Whether it was a replacement, it has never been sure to me, I don't know whether the Census Technical Committee ended up taking the responsibility of the African Census Coordinating Committee. And I should really say, because I also joined in between, because I was coming from somewhere where I was actually dealing with statutory issues, then I moved. So there I'm not quite sure what happened, but what ended up being very effective is this Technical Advisory Committee, which consists of our ECA, ONS, UNFPA, and so forth. So those three organizations ended up running the technical assistance too. Then we contributed to, as Africa actually, we contributed to the previous revision of the population and housing census. And the interesting thing in the previous revision, what we did was actually to submit a written document, which was an African addendum to the principles and recommendations. And I think if somebody is here, that addendum was actually developed was it in Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire? But we submitted a written document. And to complement that, we ran a series of regional workshops. So this is where we ended up. If you compare, we did very well in the 1990 round. 20,000, we went down to 38. 2010 round, we did very well, and we thought we are almost going to universality. But this round, if we include the two, I think it's Gabon and Angola, which are going to do by December, we are at 37. I hope those ones don't cancel. Because seriously, if they cancel now, we'll be even worse than 2000. Just those two will make it the worst round in the last 4 decades. And I'm just praying day in, day out, those two don't cancel. And, at least let's remain at 39. You see? So this is what happened in the round. We have 20 countries which conducted their census as scheduled. So the year which they said they were going to do the census, they actually did it. Then we have 3 which conducted them earlier than scheduled. I think South Africa is one of them. It might be. You didn't move it a year before. I know Zimbabwe did. So there are 2 others. So there are, for some, and most of those which moved were even more because of elections, where they were requested that we want to use the census data for election purposes. So can you do the census first before we go into election? Then we have these 25 which conducted their censuses after the scheduled year. So not even in the year. And we always have those which don't comply. I won't even mention them by name. But the very difficult countries, I think, we know there's a country which hasn't had a census in 30 years in Africa. And we have discussed that in detail and see. And we actually have escalated it to our principals and say, you actually need to engage the country. So what were the challenges for Africa during the 2020 round? The COVID, it was really a serious problem. On both planning and operational issues. And it also introduced an element of uncertainty in financial resources. And I think Tampiwa talked about it very well, that, you know, budgets were actually moved. There were increased census costs because to buy PPE, and it was actually coming from China, it became quite expensive to import that. There were procurement delays. I remember trying to get tablets. Was it for Togo? The guys from Togo, you know how we struggled to get the tablets from China to Togo because of the COVID. Also, high non-response rates requiring extension of enumeration period. I think in all our experience, I don't remember of any country which did its census during the COVID and did it in less than a month. Because it ended up being so extended because conducting people was difficult. You had to do a lot of recalls and all those kind of things. So minimum, I'm not quite sure. Ghana, you also extended quite the period of enumeration because it was also done in the COVID. Because if it was done in a normal year, I don't think it would have been that long. I mean, it's my assumption of it. And also there was quite a number of high staff turnover. You train people, but they feel, and this was a very interesting observation, where enumerators are trained, but when they feel that by actually going to households, they might actually themselves be at risk of contracting. I think we had quite a number of resignations. I can't remember which country. There were quite a number of resignations. It might actually be Ghana, where there were quite a number of people dropping out, and you had to replace them, and limited capacity of ICT, because then ICT became quite an important issue, and GIS. So countries had to revise their capacities, and there was a high demand of technical assistance. And I remember, stretching my colleague here to the limit so that we could provide the IT technical assistance which was required by the countries. So we also have our own challenges, conflict and instability. We have a region which we call the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. Those regions, we know, conflict and instability are actually very difficult. So there's disruption of infrastructure, especially communication and so forth, in those areas. So you might plan a digital census, but because this infrastructure and whatever are always, they are destroyed or something. During the course of your preparations or during the course of field work, then it becomes difficult. Political conditions and conflict. I think it's also one of the things, and I need to spend a few seconds on that. One of the most politically sensitive issues is the census. We had never realized that. And it's only now that I realize that we are actually politicians, because we have to defend some of these from a political standpoint. And you become involved in these political debates, political issues about the census. And it is, and in some places it's actually the interest in the census itself, which you end up defending and saying, what's the technical part, but what does the politician want? A very simple thing like, how come my constituency has shrunk? You see? Now, you have to defend a political sort of observation which might have nothing to do with what's happening demographically and say, how do you defend it? Somebody comes to you and says, how is my constituency shrunk? You know? And how do you answer that person? You are now put in a very political debate. And we know for sure, society is actually, we are political people. So society is frequently divided along political, ethnic, regional, and other lines. So those come into play. And as we go into the 2030 round, those are some of the things we need to take into account, that we are not just dealing with demography. This is not demography. We are dealing with people who are political, who are social, who are religious, who are everything. And if we fail to take those into consideration, then in Africa we actually end up with, very different results. Issues of natural disasters, I think we saw COVID, Ebola, and so forth, which increased the cost of our censuses. So I wanted to, this is an exercise actually which we did in the office. What are the implications of not counting, people according to schedule? So this is exactly what happened. So in Africa, more than 375 million people were at risk of not being counted just by excluding Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. So you end up with that red thing, that red schedule. So the impact of just that is actually, we didn't count an estimated 400 million. Let me just put it at that. So we are how many in Africa? We use 1.2 billion. Yeah, now it's about 1.4. So let's see, 400 million out of 1.4. How many, what proportion of Africans can we not account for? It's almost a third. It's almost a third of Africans whom we cannot account for by just leaving those three countries plus another small ones like Eritrea. Now we have Sudan. Somalia you are still planning for. We usually count Somalia in there and South Sudan. So you can actually see the impact of countries not doing censuses and the unknown part of it. COVID, I think we have looked at it. I'll just quickly run through it. The adaptations due to COVID which had to be done. Changes in methodologies. We had to try internet responses which didn't work very well. We tried telephone interviewing, also didn't work very well. Online questionnaires, not very well. Then we actually went, in some cases, paper-based self-enumeration, where the questionnaire can be dropped, then the enumerator goes back and picks up the questionnaire. Use of administrative data for census purposes were relevant. So this is what we are still trying to see, and I think that's the document which Tapiwa has, which is saying, we are trying to transition to administrative, but how do we do it as Africa? Let's see if we go through that course and say, these are the conditions. So if we have the conditions, can we work during the 2030 round to actually make sure those conditions are put in place? And that's the commitment which I said we need to do as Africa and say, we have these conditions. Are we going to form these conditions into realities. For example, if it is based on CRVS, what needs to be done in CRVS too? Then changes in staff training, I mean, they were done remotely, but I think one of the things we learned during the COVID was the last level of field staff. You can't do it remotely. For field workers, these are the enumerators. It's a disaster because training all those masses of people. I mean, I remember in a country where when they tracked, people had joined online, but when they tracked, they actually saw half had just put on either their phone or their laptop and walked away. So you are training somebody who is not even there. You see? So for field workers or enumerators, it's never advisable to train them online. In most cases, we had to insist on in-person training. Then hybrid censuses, I think, our colleagues in UNFPA are the best in that. They've, done it, worldwide. So here are the tools which we developed. I think my colleague will actually also come into describing this in detail. These were the tools which were developed by ECA. Firstly, to look at the impact of COVID-19 and how to modernize. The ones in red are actually the ones which we did. And our GIS has been involved in that. So there is a process which my colleague will go into, which is provisioning of tablets. I mean, it's a very simple sort of explanation to it. It's like when you buy a phone, you can't make a call immediately or whatever, because you have to load the applications which you need, which will help you to actually do whatever you need to. So it's actually the loading of those applications. And we were actually in the end, very smart enough that we actually developed the provisioning to the extent that you could actually tell who is this device, where are they, and whatever. Then we developed the dashboard, which is actually a way of tracking how people are actually doing in the field. The most impressive one was actually in Rwanda. It could track somebody moving from one household to the other. You could actually see on the tablet, it was actually the smartphone, somebody leaving household A to household B and so forth. So we hope that during the course of the 2030 round, some of these will be improved and so forth and so forth. Right, so these are some of the, tools which have been the provisioning, the dashboard, issues tracker. And issues tracker is a very interesting one because issues which are coming from the field are collated and responses are actually prepared. So let's say there is an issue which is common to everybody. The issues tracker can actually send automatic responses and say, if you are having this problem, do this. So you don't need everybody to be phoning to, let's say, the IT manager or the status manager and so forth. It could broadcast the actual way to mitigate a certain problem. So this became a very interesting tool. Then project management. Project management really is about the product and how to manage the product. And I think this is also one of the things which has happened in this round, which was where we might have failed ourselves. People thought, because we are going into digital censuses, they don't need a project document. So you go to a country and say, do you have a project document? No. So how are you going to do the census? Oh, we thought we would just buy tablets. And I say, yeah, you can buy tablets and whatever, but it doesn't mean The tablets will run on themselves and you don't have any project document and so forth. So to mitigate that, we thought let's develop a system which is electronic, which we can actually use for the country. And the last one is actually on census dissemination toolkit. And I think the most impressive one is actually the executive monitor, which can be used by a president. It was developed for presidents actually, where the president can get, sort of, it was for Zambia, Mola, was it? Yeah, we developed it for Zambia. And it was meant for the president when they are making any deliberations, then when they want to report on any population figures, they can actually access that, executive monitor, and it will give, the basic figures they want. If they are going to a constituency, it can give them that constituency or EA, whatever, and so forth. So, lastly, how are we planning for the 2030 round? So the first part is developing this e-census handbook. If you remember very well from the beginning in the morning, when Oliver gave his presentation, we were requested to develop this e-census handbook. And apparently, I think it's something we also stumbled on along the way. We actually didn't know we were required to. And when we actually realized that we were required to, we had to get people on board to actually help us with this process. And one of the persons will actually be presenting the next session after the break. Then we know for sure emergencies and conflicts in Africa will not go away. They are actually escalating. So African countries should transition to fully digital systems for this purpose, to actually mitigate conflicts and emergencies. And this is one thing we will be prepared for in the 2030 round, that we know there are regions where there are likely to be coups, likely to be, all these disease emergencies. So we need a sort of preparedness strategy for that. Then, African countries should make investments to strengthen administrative records. So in line with the movement towards administrative-based census, which I have my own opinions about in Africa, whether we'll even succeed in the 2030 round. Possibly we might need the 2040 round as a preparatory phase again. That's my opinion, and don't quote me. I'm telling you from my own understanding of how to move to it, we might actually be looking at 2050, where we can get the South Africans and so forth being able to do that. And lastly, we need to measure our two international agendas. 2063 becomes prime, the Africa we want, and the 2030, leaving no one behind. So we still have a mandate. 2063, fortunately, which was actually designed when Mrs. Zuma was still heading AU. We're still accountable to it. And we are required as Africans to report to it. So our censuses are actually the largest sort of data source for 2063, and they rely on us. They always ask us, where are we with these censuses in terms of reporting on the 2063? So we still have this heavy, load as people who work on censuses, and we need to make them better. So with that, I think, thank you. That's our African story. I can tell it in detail because I know everything which happened in any country, out of all the 39 at least, or even the 54, we know why certain countries didn't undertake their census. So it's a story I can one day during my retirement, sit and write, and this is what happened to the Africa program for the 2020 round. Thank you. We were just going to, okay, let me quickly just say, how are we going to do the review? We are not as resourced as the UN Statistical Division. So also the way regional economic commissions run their reviews is a bit different. With us, we decided, let's develop the document, but subject it to a review. So we have a document which we have circulated. We have the English and French version. So we will have one of the people or so who were involved in that process go through a chapter and try to present it in as much detail as possible. So we have given them about 30 minutes at minimum. Then we have put you in groups. The groups might not be ideal, but they are ideal because I think also I know most of you. I could know where to place you. I might have misplaced a couple of people, but my knowledge of almost everybody, I could place you where, no, you are best, you can best make your contribution. So in those groups, we want you to look at that chapter and say, how do you need it? Or are there any revisions which you want? You discuss those inputs this afternoon. Then from tomorrow, we go through a process of chapter by chapter presentation. So now this is where you come in useful. After the presentation by the person or an expert who is leading on that chapter, you react to it and say, these are our suggestions about how this chapter is. But we can also take your inputs at face value. So we bring back those to the plenary and say, these experts are saying we should revise this chapter on GIS like this. Does the plenary agree? And then we actually take all those recommendations and so forth and so forth. So it would have gone through almost like 3 stages in one session. You have the main presentation, and the presenter can also give their own critique of the chapter as an expert. That's why I said we all came here as experts. Then we have the group which looked at that chapter in detail, react to it and say, what are our additional inputs? What needs to be changed? I know, when we were doing the UNST, the principles and some were saying, oh, this section is good, let's leave it like that, or whatever. So all those things will come in. But we want you to agree as a group of about 6, 7 experts and say, these are possibly the 4, 5 changes we want, and this is what we are going to report. When you report in that section, we won't take that as face value. We also throw it, because there might be people who have different experiences and say, whatever you want to change in there doesn't apply or doesn't work and whatever. Then after the plenary, we'll actually look, as the technical team, is it worth changing? How should we change it, and so forth. So this week is very, very critical because the end product will be what we'll use in the 2030 round. We are fortunate enough that in this digital era, we would actually want to keep this document a living document. In case something changes, like we didn't know COVID was coming in the 2020 round. So something drastic like that comes, we might have the opportunity in changing and say, this is our circumstances, or the whole of Africa erupts into a big war or something, how do we do the censuses? Then, how should we change what we had actually said will happen in the 2030 round? So, it's a very, very important exercise, and as I said, and I keep on emphasizing, you have been brought here for your technical expertise. It's not for you to represent a country. It's actually to share your technical expertise. Yeah, we'll use country examples and whatever, because we are looking at what we have experienced in the previous round. So all of us, we were somehow involved in a census in the 2020 round. So experiences, for us, they are just examples. But in the end, how do we make this document usable to improve the 2030 round? I hope we understand each other there. It's not about praising how nicely your country did its last census. Fine, we know that you did well, yeah. But now we want to say, in the next round, how do we do it well for Africa, not for South Africa, not for Botswana or Botswana, South Africa will come into place when we are now planning for South Africa, planning for Botswana, and say, now, what do you need to do as a country? For the time being, it's the continent. It's actually to come up with a document which applies to the continent. So the interest at the moment is actually Africa, not individual countries. I hope that comes out clear. Thank you so much for allowing me this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. William. I think you need to consider writing a book about the continent. Colleagues, we're not doing well in terms of time. We're supposed to be coming back from our break. But because you're having a program director who's agile, so we are able to come up with how we're going to recover. I've already spoken to a colleague who's going to do a presentation after the break, so we agreed that we're going to reduce the time. So we're going to go on the break, but before, I know that on the program there's a Q&A. I'm going to allow 2 or 3 questions. Quickly, if you can introduce yourselves, which country you're coming from, and you can ask your question. Do we have a question? And raise your hand and then we'll bring the mic. Okay? Can you assist with the mic? Yes. Do you have the mic?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Abubakar Bello Afegua. I'm Director Census, National Commission Nigeria. I want to commend the organizers of this meeting. It's very apt and imperative. During the presentation of the last presenter, or second to the last, he talked about countries that missed the 2020 round of censuses, including my own country, Nigeria, DRC, Congo, and Ethiopia. And these are countries, big countries with huge populations, in which their demographics are very important when the narrative of the totality of Africa is being put in place. I know that also these countries are facing security challenges in their countries. What does we've had countries in war situation conducting censuses. There have been countries that are in war. So it's not acceptable to say that because there is insecurity, these countries, which in terms of their demographic contribution, do not conduct a census. I think there's need for engagement with the governments of these nations and to tell them the implications of missing out on a census. Furthermore, the issue of projections is very apt. We should encourage these countries to conduct viable and complementary projections so that the regional composition of our population can come to play. Population data in its totality has become very important to national development. And in Africa, if we do not know how many we are, where we live, the characteristics and the composition of the population, planning becomes a difficult thing. I would suggest that at the end of this workshop, part of the communique should be engaging the governments of these nations and other nations that are unable to keep up to the decennial conduct of censuses, encouraging them to develop the political will to conduct these censuses. And for those who are listeners in this round, especially 50 round, to be encouraged to submit a comprehensive population projection document so that we can use that to sustain the present demographic narrative of our region of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do we have any other? Okay, there's another question. This table, Matromola. Do we have a mic beside?
Hello, my name is Patricia. I work at the Institute of Statistical Family. First of all, I want to congratulate Mr. Williams for the brilliant presentation. And Mr. Williams talked about ECA's digital tools. I want to know how we can get the ECA's digital tools about cartography, dashboard, provision. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think most of the questions were directed to yourself, Dr. William.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Quickly, I will start with the last. Angola, we are working there. All these tools, I think. Huh? Oh, it's okay. We'll see. The IT guy here tells me we are working on the monitoring dashboard there, but not the others. So if you think they are essential, still, since you are still going to do your census, you can actually talk to the two of us. We can see how to work with Angola. Then the issue of Nigeria, I think I'm too small for that. I'll refer it to my team. Nigeria and the others. Yeah, because I know at a higher level, the last time, not even the time we were here, my principal and the DG had actually come up with a strategy, which I think needs to be actioned for the 2030 round, especially DRC. And then we didn't even know Nigeria was actually going to follow. But since they are going to the Statistical Commission, this might also be something they want to include and say, we are losing our biggest nations, and this is how we want to tackle it. I'm too small for that. I can't reach any, any decision about it except to say, if they say go to Nigeria today, I'll jump on the plane and go and come and give them a report of what needs to be done. If they tell me it's DRC, I can actually do that and give them a report of what needs to be done. So I'll rely on my principles for that.
I'm just taking this question because it says I must answer it. But what we have done in the 2010 round of population and housing census, and my brother raised it, that we used to have what we call the Africa Symposium on Statistical Development. We deliberately go to countries where we want to enhance and improve matters of statistics, but largely around the census. But beyond that, we have agreed that we need a delegation coming from UN agencies, as well as the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission, and some of the countries that have been running censuses. From our side as South Africa, we have offered that we would be willing to work with such a delegation, and myself and Oliver, who is online, know that we have to implement this. For the 2020 round, COVID caused a lot of disruption. But I think for the 2030 round, and a lot more earlier, we need to send a delegation. Because these delegations, you don't send them and they go for a day. You have to camp there for a week with a program. And we have seen it here in Southern Africa, in Angola particularly, in the 2010 round of population and housing censuses. We went there about 2 times, where we met the Minister of Planning, we met the Governor of the Reserve Bank, the Central Bank, we met key players, including parliamentarians. And in that regard, we have seen that we got commitment, because everyone was saying we certainly have to run a census. It's not, we can take it to New York in January, but I don't think it's a New York matter. We must deal with it here in the African front. And if we don't waste a lot of time, we can actually arrest it.
Okay. You wanted to add?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
quickly.
No.
Okay.
No, I just want to add one thing, not really on that issue. But actually, I think as we start this discussion on the e-census documentation, what we would want us to do, because countries are at different levels. There are actually countries that have innovated their own ways of doing things, like Start SA. So also we have countries where UNFPA has provided support. So when we are looking at this document, let's not just look at it from the viewpoint of EAC, but we look at it holistically. What has worked, whether it has been done by ONS, by US Census Bureau, by UNFPA, we need to look at it holistically. And in that way, we are going to document the African story. Because a lot of countries have been quite innovative in terms of providing or getting their own solutions. So let's look at all these documents, the chapters you've been assigned, so that at least it captures the breadth of almost everything. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. We are going to break 11:45, and we'll be coming back at